Hello, everyone. So today we're going to finish up the last two topics. And today we're going to start with the first one, which is topic 6.6, which is the causes of migration in an interconnected world. And so this is one of those consequences of industrialization is the movement of people around the world is going to be more significant and larger scale because of industrialization. So the identify and explain the causes of the global migrations from 1750 to 1900 is going to be our central question for today. So just using the language, the curriculum migrations in many cases was influenced by changes in demographics in both industrialized and industrialized societies that presented challenges to existing patterns of living. So we're going to get more into this as we get along. So I think it's about push and pull factors and such. But one of the major things that does happen as a result of why these migrations occur is because the populations are increasingly significantly going upward, right? And so this yellow box right here is the modern era that we are talking about here with this lecture. And so you can see, like based off of previous trends in history, you can see there's a significant rise in the amount of population there is. And as populations grow, the challenges become more so for economic growth to continue to follow behind it. So many people are going to migrate to other places and seek of other work. And there's a bunch of other push-pull factors that play a role in why this happens too. Because of the nature of new modes of transportation, both internal and external migrants increasingly relocated to cities. And so transportation is improving. We have things like steamships, railroads that allow people to move in and away from the countries and the places they were born in. And then another major trend that's happening is urbanization. More and more people, as a percentage of the population, are moving into cities, where cities have more available work because of improving technology, industrial agriculture that was occurring in more industrialized states. People need to find work because there's not as much of a need for as many farmhands in a lot of these countries. And so people increasingly move more and more into the cities and get industrialized jobs. And you can see that in this particular graph that as populations increase and such, the world population is increasing, but the dramatic spike in the urban populations is even more drastic than the population growth. This pattern contributed to the significant global urbanization of the 19th century, and new methods of transportation also allowed many migrants to return periodically or permanently to their home societies. So College Board is provided with three illustrative examples, and we'll talk about them. I will apologize, and some of them are not things I could really find a whole lot of. But one that is certainly information available about is the use of Japanese agricultural workers. And so Japan, a lot of agricultural workers are going to move away from Japan, do seasonal works in some cases in faraway places, islands in the Pacific particularly. But Japan, the Japanese government under the Meiji Restoration certainly encouraged people to move away from Japan to go learn about other places, as a part to help them, modernize and westernize in some case. But as they did do so, that's also because of the population increases in Japan. And so the availability of work is not always there. So sending agricultural workers out to places like Hawaii, Guam, the Philippines, to name a few, where migrant workers would work on in plantations and work on cash crops such as sugar plantations. So you can see that in the picture here. So the other thing that is an example that College Board provides, one that I had significant trouble finding really good information about. So the Lebanese merchants in Americas, and my understanding, Lebanon, which was at the time part of the Ottoman Empire, there is civil strife that's going on in Lebanon, and it is forcing, economic disruption. And so as a result, many people who are merchants decide to take their livelihoods overseas and find more stable places to set up businesses and partake in commerce. In especially the Americas. And so, you had some come to North America and the United States. You had a lot more go to South America and places like Brazil and Argentina and a few in the Caribbean. So this created this idea of the Lebanese diaspora, where Lebanese people were spread out all over the world as a result of this. But this is about the extent of I can speak upon this, and that's that. So we also have a lot of Italian industrial workers who are leaving towards Argentina. A lot of Italians are leaving Italy for several reasons. There are nationalism wars of unification that are being fought in Italy, as well as disruption to the economy there. And so a lot of skilled workers and unskilled workers too, frankly, end up moving overseas. A lot of them come to the United States and work overseas in the United States, but then a lot of them also go to Argentina. A lot more go to Argentina, apparently, and work in industrial jobs. In Argentina and the United States, both industrializing countries, welcome the laborers for some time to be able to help fill factory jobs and helping them continue to industrialize. Many of them, most of them, in fact, end up returning to Italy at some point, and they could have done it so like all the way to when it's time to retire, and they've returned home with the money they made from the whole experience. So anyway, that is another example of like how the availability of transportation allowed people to move around more so, go far away for work, and then eventually return home. Many individuals chose freely to relocate altogether, often in search of work. And so we're going to talk a couple of examples here, the first of which are the Irish to the United States. And the Irish had been coming to the United States ever since, well, before the Revolutionary War in 1776. However, the big spike of Irish immigrants will occur in the 1840s with the potato famine going on in Ireland. And that was a major push factor that drove people away from Ireland. Potato famine was caused by the potato blight, a fungus that hit the crops, and because Ireland's economy truly was strapped into agriculture, and the potato being much of the center of that, ends up leading to both an economic and humanitarian crisis in which a lot of people seek to go find better prospects elsewhere, in the United States afforded the opportunity. And so, the pull factors for why many of them come to the United States is because of the availability of jobs and, land that was available. And so, so many Irish end up coming to the United States that there's more people of Irish descent in the United States today than there is in all of Ireland, the island as a whole. And so, these are one of the reasons why so many of them relocate and resettle in the United States. And they didn't just come for temporary. Some did go back, but most of them end up staying in the United States because things were much better here. And it's also worth noting that the British had the Irish under their authority, and the British didn't necessarily treat the Irish very well. And so that was another big motivating factor why things were so much better for many Irish here in America than there were in Ireland. And I'll talk a little bit more about their impact as far as the effects go in our next lecture. Another example is the British engineers and geologists in South Asian Africa, or to South Asian Africa. So think about the reasons behind, the British are going to colonize many of the areas that they do. And one of the things is the desire to gain access to more natural resources. So geologists, their jobs generally are to go and find mineral resources and deposits, as well as oil and other things that can be used to be extracted. And then how do you do that? You have to be able to build large-scale engineering projects in order to move these materials. And so engineers show up and they build ports, they build railroads and other things. And so they play a significant role in helping, bring these things. But it is another example of people moving and then sometimes settling into these areas because of the jobs where they take them to around the world. So a new global capitalist economy continued to rely on coerced and semi-coerced labor and migration, including slavery, Chinese, Indian, indentured servants, and convict labor. I'm sorry about that being cut off, but that is convict labor, what it says there. So let's break these down individually. So first of all, slavery. Slavery was something that was beginning to become banned by the end of this period of history. So by the end of the 19th century, the United States had banned slavery in 1865 following the Civil War. Cuba in 1886 and Brazil in 1888. There was internal migrations, internal slave trade that did continue to some extent, but where it did continue to persist is in parts of Africa, and then even in parts of the colonies and empires of the French and the British and so forth, still being used as laborers on plantations. And so despite the fact that it was being banned, it's still something that does continue. But there's different forms of coerced labor, not just slavery. One other one is indentured servitude, and indentured servitude is a semi-coerced version of labor. And what happens is people who are either desiring to go travel somewhere else where they can find better work, or are trying to pay off their debts that they can't afford, will sign contracts into labor for X amount of years. And then when they do so, they're sent to all different parts of the globe. For Indian laborers, lots of Indian indentured servants, and when I mean Indian, I mean South Asian. They are going to migrate to places like the Caribbean, South and East Africa, Fiji, and you have large populations of Hindus who live in these countries still today. The Chinese, as well, even more so, are going to migrate to places like Southeast Asia, Latin America, and take up jobs of unskilled workers. And so, yeah, there's a lot of reasons why they're leaving their countries. Overpopulation in China. There was the Taiping Rebellion that was occurring, and so many people look to other places around the world for opportunities. And signing to these contract labor positions was one way of doing that. And then you finish up with convict labor. And so this is going to be both the British and the French had penal colonies. And we've talked about penal colonies before. They're colonies where they send prisoners like Australia. And so the convicts that they would arrest all across their empire, they would send to penal colonies to serve out their terms doing hard labor. One of the infamous prisons of this era was the island known as Devil's Island, which is off the coast of French Guiana. And the prisoners who sent there worked very hard labor. They were often overworked and very tough environmental conditions of tropical along the equator, and underfed. And so people would suffer greatly as a form of convict labor in this time and period. So that is going to wrap up like some of the main causes of global migrations from 1750 to 1900. But primarily, it's a lot have to do with industrialization. As like more jobs become available in cities and industrialized countries, you see the migrations of people from industrialized societies in rural areas who are going to move. And that is going to be bottom line. But then don't forget to put some more specific examples that we talked about later. That's Mr. Henry signing up. I'll see you at 6.7.